Good morning, everyone. I actually have been thinking about the Midah. Hope put it in the dedication, one of the Midot, the Midah of courage, Ometz Lev, which is a Midah that's not often a Midah in different official collections of Mussar precepts, but um, it's very much a Midah. And I've been thinking about that, the midah of courage, especially in relationship to kindness. And I'm curious if anyone got to read or listen to the Ocean Vuong interview in the New York Times I think last week. He's a Vietnamese American poet uh, and novelist. He has a It kind of came. He's a poet, I think, first and foremost, but has a beautiful novel called On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. And it was one of those long form interviews. And one of the things that he named, he said, I'm very interested in my writing these days about exploring this idea of kindness without hope. Kindness without hope. He says he became tired of these arcs in stories, most of the stories we read, which are arcs of transformation. The person gets the job or their partner or whatever. I mean, it's some sense of transformation, right? It's like that's sort of the classic plot line. And he said he's been thinking a lot about many of the people he knows. His new book is about working for a long time in the fast food industry. And he just people he knows who never got the job, never got the raise, right? Or the promotion, or never got kind of the breakthrough into whatever next chapter of life, paid more or achieved something in a sort of traditional way of understanding that. And he just reflected on the kindness that he saw these people kind of going through every day towards each other, bright shoveling each other out of the snow, just towards the camaraderie at work. Um, and he became interested in wanting to write about, not without an outward transformation, right? Trying to avoid that way of telling a story, which is how most of us think about transformations. I think actually it's still transformative, right? Kindness is still transformative, but it transforms us. It transforms us in a less visible way. So I'm very interested in this idea, especially from a Musar vantage point of kindness without hope. Like we're here to practice kindness. Whatever happens as a result of that is sort of out of our hands. It's another way of saying passionately involved but unattached to the results. So kindness without hope. And the reason I thought of courage, to bring it back to that, is because I think to practice kindness without hope, we need courage. And I think somehow I, I think it also relates to this idea about cynicism, right? Sort of the threat of cynicism to a Musar practice or to a human life. Um, we don't want to be a friar, to use sort of the Yiddish term, right? We don't want to be taken advantage of. We don't want to be duped. We want to maximize, like, whatever it is. We want to say like, oh, I got that too, but I got it on sale. I waited 3 weeks so I didn't have to, we like maximizing whatever it is in any aspect of our lives, right? We like to feel like that we've taken advantage of the system in a way that's beneficial. And and I think cynicism is also this kind of time-honored guard against vulnerability. And so when we have hope without kindness without hope, it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that there won't be transformation. It doesn't mean that we have a bleak outlook on the world. It's just that we're trusting kindness as a path in itself. We're doing kindness for its own sake, lishma. We're not doing it in order to have an outcome. And ultimately, I think that's a pretty deep thing to know that like this spiritual practice. Norman Fisher talks about spiritual practice. What's uh what's a commonality in all spiritual practices? It's uselessness. Like at least in a way that we usually measure, right? I mean, technically, spiritual practice is sort of a waste of time, and in a particular way of measuring, not actually. I think it's the opposite. I'm biased. But he says the ways that we're used to sort of measuring things, spiritual practice pulls the rug out from under that. It says measure differently. It says be kind without hope that things will change. Be kind even if there's not a payoff. Ocean Vuong had another quote connected to this. Talked a lot about sincerity. Um, He said, our task is to engage the phenomenon of the world with earnestness, to engage the phenomenon of the world with earnestness. Um, but we live in a world where cynicism passes as intelligence, right? Earnestness is frowned upon because it means you probably haven't considered the manner, you haven't considered the matter deeply enough. Ocean Vuong says the cynic stays between the neutral lines and judges. Um, so again, courage, like it's courage to not be a cynic, to risk being foolish and to risk being a friar and to wish being to risk being duped, to risk going outside of the neutral lines, you know, and then being the subject of other people's judgments. To engage the phenomenon of the world with earnestness. I really like that. And I think it takes courage. And I also think, and I'll I'll close with this, that there's something about if we're practicing kindness without hope, that can sound like another form of cynicism, right? Well, we're being kind even though we know nothing will change. Or it's not that. It's not I think we do have a harvest as we go through. I think we do practice kind of a faith grounded in experience. Like we do the work of meditation, we do the work of Mussar, for instance, and we do see things shift in subtle ways, sometimes dramatic ways, but mostly very subtle ways. Um, and mostly it's even if it's not directly named back to us, we notice that we're more available to others and more available to ourselves. We notice we are not holding the surety about our own identity and who we are and what that identity rests upon with the same sort of intensity. There's more spaciousness inside us and around us. And it's very subtle, I think. Um, and I think that helps us to practice. So even if we're kind of talking about kindness without hope or doing things for their own sake without expectation of sort of large gesture rewards and all of this stuff, sometimes that comes. That's great. But we are feeling as we do this practice, hopefully, um, that there is a shift, and I think it's maybe the shift itself is and so I think there is something that kind of returns to us that lets us know that we're on the right track somehow, and so I did want to put that out there as well, so this doesn't sound too nihilistic or something. I'm just really interested in this idea of practicing kindness without experts. It's in the spirit of when you hear a lot of people say, do a mitzvah without, do it anonymously. You know, I've heard a lot of people say that over the years. Different people point to this practice. I think it's very transformative. I think it's very real because it's exactly this. It's a kindness without hope. Because for us, oftentimes the kindness is we want a recognition, we want a quid pro quo, we want to be known as kind, we want all of these things. So that can be a way in. I think it's courage too. You do a mitzvah without anyone knowing about it. So how do we engage the world with earnestness? You know, how do we and not worry about how that makes us seem? I think we can think about that as we sit in terms of the instructions for just notice what arises, right? We can practice countering cynicism as we sit on the cushion, as we sit in our little window of silence here, to not think when a thought or a feeling comes up, "Ah, I know what this is." You know, in the expert's mind, there's not a lot of options. In the beginner's mind, there are many, many options, many possibilities. So we sit as beginners, we don't sit as experts. And the beginner's question is always, is there's nothing cynical about it. What is this? You know, what is this feeling? What is this thought? And we can practice kindness without hope just in how we regard ourselves when we sit, all of those sort of negative stories that we can start to tell. Don't have to worry if it, whatever. We don't have to worry about the longer arc of things. We can just say, in this moment, how can I practice more friendliness towards myself in terms of the thoughts that I'm having or the thoughts that I'm believing that I'm having? And I think this can connect us with a very natural, innate courage. It's the courage to be, as Paul Tillich put it, the courage to live, the courage to keep practicing. So let's sit. Hareini mekabel alai et mitzvat haboe ve'ahavta l'reaha kamocha v'zchut ze eftach pi. Behold, may we take upon ourselves the mitzvah of loving our fellow human being as ourselves. And by this merit and this intention, may we open up our mouths, may we move into our days, and may we orient our ways of seeing. So, amen. Thank you, everybody. And we have two more sessions, two more Wednesday or Tuesday sessions, and then before we take our break for the summer. Okay, see you soon.